why is the company so low on cash? We're bringing in revenue, but we don't have cash. Something wasn't working. So I said, let me follow the money. And long story short, I identified that there had been over 50 million, as I found it, fraud committed by the founder.
I'm Mark Cook, president of Windfall Partners. We get leaders unstuck and thriving with their teams. After turnarounds as chief executive, the largest ever studies of award-winning leaders, a New York Times bestseller, and 5-star keynotes, I've coached 4,000 client wins at top brands. My Bold Encounters is an advanced system for leading. First, powerful steps on a path forward. Second, problem-solving skills that beat obstacles fast. Now, lead with Bold Encounters today.
Welcome to Bold Encounters. I have with me a very fascinating businesswoman, Jill Dempsey. How are you, Jill?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us. You know, I was very interested in having you for a couple of reasons. I started to hear about you doing wonderful, philanthropic, very human things, which I think is admirable, with Friends of Amar as the executive director, which is really helping really young people that are international in very difficult places that I'll let you talk about the way you want. The other thing, though, that is interesting is that you are so dang commercial and not just philanthropic. You have run companies, started companies, exited companies, cleaned them up and ended them. You had a really successful exit with Manduka when you stepped in from the venture side to actually operate the company because it needed some kick. And then you went to a place called Blue Stripe, which was one of those companies I just talked about. It was not perfect, so you had to step in and get it going, and then you had to actually move on for a minute as it got going, and you went and you ran Duo, and you're going to tell us a story about a company that they managed called Noah Event Venues, and then you went to Rocket Tail and had a successful exit. But then all of a sudden, this Blue Tail that you had turned around started to have some serious problems. You had to go do the very difficult work that many people have either been on one side or the other of, which is to wind things down with the people and the assets and everything when things don't go perfect. So, wow, big commercial successes and work that's hard, and also helping children that are orphans and in very difficult situations. So I'm excited to hear your couple of stories as we go through this.
I have a few.
Yeah, you have a few. So I want to go back and I want to start a little earlier, and I want to ask you, why were you so interested in business when you were a child, and what happened to get you interested in such things?
Yeah, great question. So there's two memories that I have that pop up, which is quite interesting because one was commercial and one was charitable. So around the same age, I was 8, grew up in Baltimore, quite the diverse community of need and opportunity. So one weekend, I had an opportunity to, I saw, make money. My aunt was putting on a conference at American University, and I asked her, could I go sell concessions? And she said, absolutely. So I went and sold, candy and sodas and water. So that was my first foray into, I didn't know the word for it, but entrepreneurship. Loved it. Okay. Similar age, I saw a need, which is, I would hang out with that same aunt who lived in Washington, D.C. And, and I would see people who really struggled, right? And I saw that throughout my daily life. And I wanted to do something about it. So I grew up outside of Baltimore, and I went to all my neighbors. I wrote notes and taped it on their doors and said, I'm going to come by on Saturday. Please leave out any canned foods that you have, and I'm going to, see what I could gather up.
Wow.
I was thinking I would have a few bags of, and I didn't know where I was going to take that canned food, but I figured it would be a food bank, right? And that they would get it to where it needed to go. That Saturday I went around and I couldn't even carry the canned food. There were, long story short, filled the back of my dad's Ford truck. and went to the yellow pages, which that's what we needed to use at the time. And I called the food bank to figure out where we were going to take it. Every food bank said, no, we're good. We have more than we need. And my little 8-year-old soul was quite saddened by hearing that, because I was like, but I have, there are people who need it. And the food banks are saying, no, we're good. Right. And that, I think, is clearly, it's something that still really resonates with me, because I recognized that maybe I needed to find the place for that to go. So my aunt, I called her, and she said, I think we have an opportunity in a place that needs it. So we went, and she knew of a family that was a refugee family. And it was they had struggled with, the government had been overtaken in their home, their home country. They had recently come over. It was, the father was a doctor, and the mother was educated, but now they couldn't work here. The husband had recently gotten a job as a dishwasher. I went to the Marriott hotel where he was a dishwasher and was able to see that, which just burned into my soul. We went to the home. The cabinets were bare, and we were able to fill those. And so that was quite remarkable for me to see. And since then, I've recognized that those are 2 lanes that I really wanted to drive forward in.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Thanks for letting me share that.
Yeah. People get the instinct to do something young, and it can really take hold. Yeah. And you ended up later on getting involved with became a partner at Dolphin Capital and CEO.
Yes.
But you don't just wave a magic wand and instantly become really important titles like that. And so tell us about your climb. I noticed the degree behind you, the Johns Hopkins University. Clearly education was part of the answer. But
yes.
Give us the story on how you climbed up through corporate and philanthropy. And then also give us your best lessons from each stop.
Okay. A lot of lessons, and I've been really grateful for all of them. So on the corporate ladder, I'm not sure that I've even climbed the corporate ladder. I think I've been navigating through entrepreneurial hikes. And I've really enjoyed the view, to be honest.
Awesome.
And I've looked at, here's what I would say is, I've looked at corporate buildings when I've been on these hikes. And I've said, I get why people are over there in the corporate buildings, because there's really great infrastructure over there.
Yeah.
Right? There's obvious levels, and there's elevators that can clearly take you up from level 1 to 2 to 3 to 4.
Basketball courts and sushi in the lunchroom. Yeah.
Yes. And there's cafeterias, and there's lights that turn on and off, and there's switches. Right? So thanks for going with me in this analogy. So I've seen that. But I have known, oh my gosh, I like the fresh air over here. And I know sometimes it's going to rain and sometimes it's going to snow. But I would much rather chart my own course, and I fall down a lot, but I would rather do that. And it's been crazy. And on the days where I'm like, why the heck am I deciding to do this? I remind myself of how I feel when I see the sunset. And gosh, it's been so in terms of how have I sort of, found myself, I would say found myself in certain positions. It's because I've navigated my way, where I've seen certain peaks and certain valleys that I've wanted to go to, and then I just find my way to them. Right? Yeah. And then sometimes we'll be on a trail, and I'll stop with this analogy, and I've met amazing people on these journeys, and that's what's gotten me into experiences. Meaning, then I've done business ventures, right? Mm-hmm. Because I've chosen to run forward with certain things. That's built my ecosystem.
Yeah, and it sounds like not just business ventures where you have a bunch of capital or money thrown at you, but it sounds like those early days where you were pretty scrappy in the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. So it's introduced me to people. And that has led to opportunities. So it's been then the opportunity to dive into a company as COO or CFO or CEO, or pursue things that it's really come organically, rather, because I've never, knock on wood, I've never applied for a job.
Wow, never. Wow, it's amazing.
One exception, which is which is this adjunct professor role that I'm in. But that was because I was like, oh, that'll
Just
be
want to do
really fun. But
something fun at night, yeah, and help
yeah,
kids. Yeah, I
yeah,
get it.
yeah. I've never
Well,
played with
I
them.
shouldn't call them kids. I still make that mistake
Yeah,
having done that too.
yeah, yeah,
You call them
yeah,
kids, you just can't help because they look so dang young. They're
yeah, yeah.
18
And
years old
then
in front of you. Anyway,
yeah. So then I guess I need to answer your second question is on the academic side. So that was my commercial, side. And then on the academic, I've learned that I really like to learn.
mm,
And that's not, the academic route. I learn well in that
mm,
regard.
mm,
Not everybody, learns their best in that, but I do. So I have, really enjoyed that. And so I got my bachelor's degree, and that's been really foundational for me. And I studied entrepreneurship because that was fun. And then I did finance because I figured that would just be really valuable toolkit for me to be able to carry,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Let me
and it
let me
is.
learn rows and columns in Microsoft Excel. That'll be great. And then got a graduate degree as well, which has been valuable. So the lesson, I think the pivotal lesson there has been investing in myself
Mm,
is where I've gotten the greatest ROI.
mm, yeah. Well, you mentioned one other thing I want to ask you about. You talked about how important it was that you met a lot of key people
Yeah.
and fortuitous people and people you sought out probably. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
times we hear that a lot when we get career advice or we're encouraged to do that by our board or whatever the case may be, wherever you find yourself in work life. Even if you're young, your mom or dad says, hey, you've got to network and connect with people. But it is
Yeah.
it is an evasive understanding if you get a job and you climb midway up the ladder in some company, even if it's a small one.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's a large one, you can say, okay, well, I'm making friends. I'm going to lunch. I'm having conversations in the parking lot and the water cooler. So
Yeah.
let's dissect it a little bit. When you say you met great people and that was a
Yeah.
key, the other half of your success practically, let's dissect it and
Mm-hmm.
tell us how you mean that and what you literally do.
Great. So I'll give some ideas and then you can sort of explore it with me.
Yeah.
So one thing is that I recognize there are certain skills and talents that I don't have.
Mm,
And I like to, rather than going and meeting another me,
mm-hmm,
I like to meet others that have the skills and talents and even personal attributes that are different than mine.
mm-hmm,
And that might not be as comfortable for me because, sure, I can go talk to another Jill and kick it off right away with
mm-hmm,
another Jill,
mm-hmm.
right? Because I'm going to get everything about that person.
Yeah.
But it's been really valuable for me to even seek out people that have different sets of experiences, different skill sets, and all those things because I'm going to just have be able to really soak up and not just take but also hopefully give and have a healthy balance there in meeting different people.
Yeah. Let's call these
Yeah.
people adjacent experts just for a second and
Okay.
and give us a recipe for meeting, developing a conversation, then a friendship, then gaining value, then contributing value, just for a minute if you would.
An example you said?
Yeah, like a really specific ingredient or a recipe for going through the process of meeting and going through the steps of developing that sort of a relationship in business. That's what's really invasive, I think.
Okay. So an example would be if I've been in finance,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So you said the word is what term did you
I
give
just
this?
call
An
it. You were talking
adjacent?
about complementary and diverse and
Yes.
not you. So adjacent to it's not maybe finance, but it's probably an
Yeah.
accountant, and then it's probably
Right. Right.
sales or something. So they're
Yeah.
adjacent experts around your
Great.
genre. Call it that, and then tell us the recipe.
Okay, so I love this. An adjacent expert, because I've met many adjacent experts, and first off, I'm going to go to an environment that's very welcoming to an adjacent skills, right? So if I'm focused on, let's say, private equity, I'm not going to spend my time necessarily when I'm looking to meet adjacent experts. I'm not going to go to a private equity conference
I
for
see.
that. Right? I'm going to figure out what skills might be really valuable and interesting that are adjacent to this. So, honestly, when I was in private equity and I was thinking, okay, I'm going to give an example of the software systems that companies need, very adjacent, because every one of our companies needed these. And so I would go to conferences about IT and software implementation. NetSuite, if we're all familiar with Oracle NetSuite.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
And
Oracle
I met
World or something. Yeah.
the Oracle world, or ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, I think is the
Yeah. Oh,
what
joy.
that means.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so fun, but I actually
You dig
came
it. Yeah, I get it.
I do dig it because there are adjacent experts in the ERP system world
Yeah.
where they are so amazingly intelligent about the systems of business, right? And
Technology.
what's going to
Yeah.
be really valuable to support business infrastructure development.
Hmm.
So I reached out to, I'll give a direct example, the
Please.
head of marketing of NetSuite.
Wow. You just called the head. Great. Keep going.
Reached out via LinkedIn because I had gone and implemented NetSuite across a number of businesses.
Hmm.
And I thought, why don't I reach out? So that's an adjacent expert. And step after step after step, ended up getting invited onto the client advisory board of NetSuite.
That's terrific.
And I met a number of adjacent experts, right? Because I'm not an expert of technology, and I hopefully that I know it was very collaborative for me to go and fly to, at the time it was fly to Denver and have meetings talking about what was helpful for me and helpful for them about the system. So
And I think the
that's
same is true, like even in a small environment where you may not be someone who knows all that you know, but you can find
yeah.
someone that's adjacent to your skill set and just pick off people one at a time. It could be lunch, it could be golf, it could be
Mhm.
a minor trip that's an hour away, or whatever you can
Yeah.
decide creatively that you both would want to do. There's, go
Yes.
hot air balloon with four of you or something. But I
Yeah.
think it's
Fun. Yeah.
possible without flying and calling the head. Like just going up a level and going outside a level really can bring new
Yes.
ideas to
One,
your career, don't you
that
think?
extra step.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Almost no one does that, by the way. Again, we found very few people doing something like this. And so if you're in a big corporate environment, you kind of focus on what the existing business is
Yeah.
and you just
And then
stay there. And all of a sudden, you don't have a
your
network except
aperture
yeah.
your aperture gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
So if you just widen that aperture, you'll be really amazed and at the value that comes from that. And I'll just give another
Do.
example. Many of you listeners will likely find you'll be faced with opportunities to go to fundraising galas for charities.
Yeah.
I think we're all asked to, right?
As soon as you
Or various
graduate.
lunches. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you'll be asked to go to various events and luncheons and they'll say, "Hey, and could you bring somebody else?"
Mm.
I was invited to one this weekend and they said, "Could you bring two or three other people?" And I thought, how about I reach out, use this as an excuse to reach
Yeah.
out to people I don't really know
Yeah.
and see if they could come. And I did. I took a breath and said, let me just do this. And now I've got two people attending an event that I don't really know, but we get to use this as an opportunity to all meet new people.
You meet in the parking
So,
lot or at a house and you can get in the car
yeah.
and it's all personal. That's very intimate that way. And then you're
Yes.
parking and walking and then you're feeling together without
Mhm.
expressing it explicitly. And then you
Yeah.
learn everything and talk on the way home and all that. That's an amazing
Yeah.
idea. Amazing idea, really.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's really good
Great.
advice. Okay, let's move on and talk about
Okay.
your next stop because you've got a lot of great places that we've got to
Yeah.
talk about.
All the steps.
So you start leading and scaling companies. Tell us about your first major exit and the experience where you were involved with funding Manduka, the people involved,
Okay.
not by name if you don't want, but just how it really looked kind of in a gritty sort of real way.
Yeah, so I was about a decade in of being a general partner of an investment firm.
Mm-hmm.
So we had about 100 million under management.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd really enjoyed that experience and stepped into one of our new investments, which was Manduka.
Mm-hmm.
And if any of you are familiar with that company, it's in the health and wellness space, a yoga company, and we produced yoga mats
Mm-hmm.
and the hard goods of the yoga space. It was a really popular brand globally, and then also introduced some apparel. And so, after completing that investment, I moved me and my family to LA and stepped in as COO and CFO to support the growth stage of that company. And it was a really fun experience. I have a number of adjectives I could give. So it was absolutely enjoyable in many regards. The team and the experiences there were just, I loved walking in. I had the warehouse team as one of the departments that I managed, and I loved walking out there and had one weekend, just one fun memory. One weekend I went in and me and a few of the team members were trying to surprise the warehouse because it was just this unbranded, you know, space. The warehouse team, nobody ever thought of. And everybody else in the front of the house, we'll call it, they had the cooler talk. They had the food and the snacks, and they had yoga classes that they could attend every day, right? But then you had
And
the
then,
real workers.
and then they had the logo apparel and the
Oh, they had everything,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And you're just like, you're bougie, right? You're
yeah,
you're out there and you're like, okay, and you're feeling the brand
yeah,
day in and day out.
yeah,
We're like, we're building something that's bringing health and wellness to the world.
yeah.
Okay. But then you had in the back of the house the warehouse workers that were sweating it to make it possible for us to bring health and wellness to the world. And it was this unbranded just warehouse. You wouldn't know it, right? Whether you're shipping out, plastic goods, you wouldn't have any idea what's being shipped out. It's just frankly a warehouse. So one weekend, went out there and our logo was a frog. Okay, red frog, and we installed I think it was a 10-foot diameter frog, smacked it on the one of our huge walls, and then put branded labels on all of our aisles so that it seemed like a retail environment, and just put things there that were really, I guess, introducing the culture to that space.
Yeah.
So and that was really fun. And then we took the warehouse team to lunch. What an idea. But to show the team that they were as valuable as our product development team and as our accounting team and our customer service team, right? So that was such a great experience for me and our executive team. It was a busy time. If you can imagine, we were focused on growth. And 2.5 years in, we ended up selling and completed the sale to $1 billion fund. And it was about a 6-month process of going through the due diligence and closing on that deal. So it was just all a whirlwind.
Yeah.
Moving there, working on growth, culture building, product development, and then all of a sudden selling.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
and then I moved back to Utah.
you came home. I hope, but you've been everywhere. We're going to talk about that because you are
Yeah.
everywhere and you have been everywhere. And I caught you here because I know a common acquaintance.
Yeah.
We should probably shout him out. Kent Bowman, one of the great people in this world, actually.
Huge mentor.
He's actually, I've interviewed him. He's in on previous 2 episodes. So go listen to that if you haven't listened to him. So I want to just point out one thing because in my day job, so to speak, parallel to this, I do 5-year plans of CEOs, and I focus on making the immediate quarter better by doing so with 2 of the elements. And so a lot of the audience that I have are high-level leaders or serious philanthropic leaders or even large family leaders. And but if you are 18 and I hear that you built a company and you did all the things in the warehouse that you did, those things are pretty practical. It's post warehouse are some of the things that you may not even know what they are, but the work of doing due diligence. First of all, what is it and how hard is it? It's easy for you because you're a finance person from Johns Hopkins, but
Okay.
talk about those little micro steps to get in. Why, exit sounds bad, for those people, but tell us how yours was good in that case.
Okay. Thanks for reminding me of, I have all of these weird words that I
We
that I
all
say
do. We all do.
in my landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was running Manduka, and we had an opportunity to continue, so we were growing quickly. And the market, we were growing quickly, and the market for yoga was hot, right?
Literally sometimes,
And
yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so we were approached by another investment firm that said, "Hey, if you want to grow faster, we would buy you." And that would mean that you could still own some of the company, and we would put more money in so that the company can grow even faster.
Well, let me ask you, did you literally do any? I've never done yoga in a real place.
Yeah.
So do you have you ever seen or participated in the really hot yoga like I'm talking about,
Oh
where it's
yeah.
110 or what is it?
Yep.
Tell me that
Yes,
experience super fast, and that's a tangent, I know, and then
yes.
get back to the
I
exit.
like this tangent. I like this tangent. So I've participated in hot yoga. Some people love it. I don't. Because you know what I'd say is I love yoga. When I do it, I get hot myself, so I don't
I
need the
don't need
room to
help.
prevent.
Okay.
but it's great. It definitely serves some people. But let me speak to, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
this whole situation, running and operating Manduka. One thing I learned in this was that I didn't focus on myself enough. I was so focused on the business that, ironically, the health and wellness space, my wellness was at an all-time low.
That is ironic.
Yeah. So it's just something I'd throw out for, for people to consider. Maybe now in the market, the pendulum has swung, more the other way, which some could argue is, oh, just focus all on yourself. Like, there's definitely a healthy balance there.
Yeah.
of figuring out, really, really, doing well with the role that you're in and focusing on yourself, because the healthier you are, the stronger you'll do in your role.
Yeah. You know what I'd say about that too is I think you just inadvertently, and you probably know this, you inadvertently just connected the two recent topics. So when you're trying to meet someone in your company or in your industry or just ahead of you because you're young and starting out, and you take the advice that you just gave us to find people that are strangers to meet, that are adjacent to what you do. Well, it's hard to do that, especially when you don't have $1 million of money to spend on golf trips and things like that. And these things like a yoga or a CrossFit or just running your first marathon or half marathon or 10K or whatever it is, it's such a social thing where you don't even have to even be doing it with people in the morning. You can get to that, and that builds permanent, lifelong friendships. But to know that someone else is doing something, even in a club or even at work or wherever, church, wherever it is, the conversation intensifies, and you become, with this commonality, intense friends, and you can have an ongoing conversation all the time that can even lead to text and such. So keeping a focus on your health throughout your career, or in spots of your career, like I have more done. I haven't done it all the time, but I've run Ironman and things like that, and the conversations are plentiful. So I just add that little nugget.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so someone says, hey, you guys have helped this grow. Tell us how you were growing, and tell us how this gasoline they called money or additional investment or capital was going to fuel that fire.
For Manduka?
Yeah.
So the offer that we received was to sell, or as I said, exit, and the business would receive capital that would enable the funding of hiring more people.
Yeah, but you attracted them in the first place. Like you had it going on. You were getting sales of these items you sell to yoga.
Yeah.
How did you get that going faster?
We first off had a strategic plan,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's saying, well, obviously, but you know what?
Well,
How we
obviously.
got it?
What
Yeah,
was
yeah.
it?
The strategic plan was, how would I summarize this? Was when we acquired the company,
Yeah.
there was a plan, but it included so much. And I
Mm,
would say chaos, because the
mm,
attempt was, they saw the opportunity, but there were so many things that they had been working on that they weren't accomplishing any of them.
yeah.
So
Death.
our strategy didn't require much, intelligence. We said we're actually going to narrow it in on a few. We're going to focus on the core product, and we're going to focus on our top customers. Because if we really focus on improving those two things, our core product, this one mat, right?
Hmm.
Let's improve that in terms of improving the cost from our manufacturer and improving the quality, improving, right? There are a few sub bullet points to that, but let's improve that mat.
Mm,
And then let's improve our top customers, right?
yep.
If we improve Dick's Sporting Goods and our top 5,
Hmm.
then we figured that's going to lead to some smart learnings that are going to waterfall into our other sales channels, right?
And you're
And
going to
that's what
find more people that measure out just like those
exactly.
organizations or individuals,
Yes.
right?
Yep. So bringing that clarity to the business,
Hmm.
that led to growth
Yeah.
and
Brilliant.
improved gross margin and improved profitability. And that then led to outside capital being really interested in what we had to offer.
There's also another thing people miss about focus, the value of focus, that people are scared. Most companies are scared. Like you go throw a rock randomly around you to the biggest company towards you, go
Mhm.
in the management meeting, and at some point over the last 2 years, the CEO or someone very important in the company has said, "We want to serve everyone because we
Yes.
want to get all the revenue we can," like you're saying, and what
Mhm.
happens when you focus on someone you're ideally suited to help and serve and change their job and how it functions and change their team and how they like doing work with them and change their customers and their organization? What happens is you build a capability that makes you formidable for any other
Yes.
solution. And people that need that, like that ideal client that you selected,
Yep.
all those prospects that measure up just like them, have a perfect partner to buy from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. And your decision making is refined.
You're better,
You
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 know
can
it.
make you're better, you can make decisions faster, right? And so I would summarize that in, rather than adding, you recognize the value in taking away,
Yeah.
right? Which is uncomfortable often, but you recognize, whoa, there's actually value in reduction.
So true. Excellent
Yeah.
point. Okay. Now, I know that there's an intense, exciting, well, intense at least, part to your Blue Stripes story. But I want to just talk about the first part. It was not doing so hot, and you came in and did something similar. Tell us a little bit in a different way what you did there.
Well, yeah. So actually, the summary is, had great success selling Manduka,
Yeah.
and I thought, so I sold it, and I moved from LA to Utah, and I thought I would take a little break,
Yeah.
breathe a little. I was tired,
Yeah. I'll bet.
and then I get a call from our largest investor in Manduka, and he said, "Well, what are you going to do now?" And I said, "I'm going to take a break. I'm tired." And he said, "Wow, but I've got a new deal that I just invested in, and you're going to step in as CFO." And I said, "Okay, yeah,
You couldn't
great
help
guy."
yourself.
Yeah, couldn't help myself. So I stepped into Blue Stripe, which was a company based in Europe
Mm.
and focused on student housing for study abroad
Mm.
students coming from primarily the US
Oh.
and studying abroad throughout Europe, Italy, France, Spain. and the company was based in Paris and Ireland. So the traveler in me said, "Gosh, this is quite interesting. I don't even care if the business model doesn't make sense."
That's awesome.
So so I stepped in as CFO as the company was just forming, and we were doing our initial fundraising and various formation tasks and strategy building across Europe.
Mm.
So stepped in there and spent about a year doing that until getting it to the point that it was ready for me to hand over my CFO roles to a European CFO because I wasn't ready. I had spent time in Europe but had a young child and wasn't able at that time to move over to Europe. So handed over the role and was a minority owner and moved on at that point.
Yeah.
But we'll continue with the story later.
Yeah, and your Gaelic and German were a little rusty, probably too.
I had a little bit. Yeah.
So let me ask you this: if you were to pick one thing that you did there to really make an impact as you showed up, what's your favorite thing and the most meaningful impact you had to make that thing turn upward too?
In that stage was the balance of bringing the foundational experiences that I had
Mm-hmm.
of forming businesses,
Mm-hmm.
bringing strategy and financial planning
Mm-hmm.
perspective mixed with entrepreneurial, I'll call it, comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you form a new company, you you can plan one thing, but that's not going to happen,
Never.
right? As ever. And I'm comfortable in that environment. We
Mm-hmm.
talked about me hiking around and being okay that things aren't going to be as planned.
Yeah.
And that was really important that I had that perspective, because you think, that's going to happen here in the US with companies.
Mm-hmm.
And you could only imagine what it's like when you're forming new companies based in the US, but operating in Ireland and France and Italy and Spain.
Yeah. Crazy. Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't tell us about the crazy intense part. But
Yep.
what I want to do is have you move on. Now this one is big. So then you go to another funding company duo, and they have a company called Noah Event Venues. This is your chance to tell the big story, and it's a little longer, but tell us in the hero's journey what happened at Duo. What went on there?
Okay. Well, so remember I had, yeah, and this was all happening quickly.
Yeah.
Like I sell a company in LA. I moved back to Utah. I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm going to take a break, but I get a call and from a great friend of mine and he says, "You're going to be CFO of a European company." I go do that for, not too long, but get it rolling. And then I think I'm going to be able to take a break, but I get a call from an individual. We had been close friends for years and years, and all the way from college. And he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, I'm wrapping up this deal in Europe. Why? What's up?" And he said, "Well, I'm number two." He said, "I'm number two in a large company. $250 million has been invested in real estate development in the wedding venue sector. And we need somebody to step in as CEO because we're at a high growth stage and we need someone who has experience. And we think that's you, that you'd be perfect to step in and help us grow as we're at an inflection point focused on, and we're the leader in the space, in the wedding event industry space."
So let me
And
pause you
so,
for a second. Let me
yeah,
pause you and ask you, wedding event space.
yeah,
I have 5 sons. I've had a wedding, and I just
okay,
did the breakfast. So I didn't.
okay.
So what are we talking about? Are we talking buildings? Are we talking about events? Are we talking
I
about
had the
market?
same
Yeah.
question.
What is
Yeah,
it? Dresses, flowers? What are we talking about?
yeah. When I got that call, I said, "Sure, let's talk."
Mm-hmm.
And so then I went to a lunch with him and the chairman, who was then the CEO, but they were looking for a CEO. And what I learned of the business that I then stepped in to run was their business was they would raise capital from outside investors, and build new wedding venues where brides and grooms would hold their weddings. And this business also operated the venues. So they were real estate developers, and then they operated the venues. So they had wedding planners there, they had a sales team. And so, your son or your son's, bride could have called up and said, yep. And said, "Oh my gosh, we need this venue. This is, and I need this date." And they would handle the linens, the tables, the setup, all that a typical venue does, and coordination with other vendors like caterers and
Cake makers.
weddings are big deals to plan.
Big deal. They are. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like the wedding version of McDonald's. Like, let's find the best real estate, change the use in this perfect way if it's the right spot, build a gorgeous building that someone wants to have their event in, and just keep it just barely generic enough so that maybe no matter what happens, it's valuable. Is that kind of what you're doing?
That's what they were going for, where, because they recognized that the wedding space is very fragmented.
Yeah.
That there weren't chains out there. There was just, Jennifer has her unique venue and Julie has hers, and there wasn't a model figured out. And they said, let's figure out the model, because once we figure out the, what layout works, and we figure out how our sales pitch should go, we figure it out once, let's stamp it out twice. And at that point that they talked to me, there were over 40 venues across the country operating under their brand.
So weddings involve vows and promises and good behavior. So tell us about the company.
And standing by those. So I agreed. I said, okay, I'll step in as CEO, because I had just run a large company and was very comfortable with that and get excited about growth. So I stepped in, and we formed a management company to cleanly, they suggested that. Let's form a management company and we'll move all of our employees into this company, so you've got a fresh start. So we did that. And I had about 350 employees.
Yeah.
And as a reminder, there was over about $250 million that had been raised over time and invested in this business and real estate. There was also capital needed at the time, I was told. So I enlisted as the term goes, friends and family, meaning individuals I knew, to raise a little bit of capital. So I raised about $7 million when I joined to get some equity, or some debt in the business. And I was building strategy. That's what I like to do, right? So, hey, what's our growth plan? How are we going to, bring some order to this chaos? I was excited. I rolled up my sleeves. Okay. And less than a year into it, I was feeling like something was off. Why is the company so low on cash? We're bringing in revenue. We have profit, but we don't have cash. Why doesn't this work? And I'm a financial person, so it seemed really off to me. I should be able to understand these formulas and follow this math through. And we know, we hear the saying, follow the money.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I
or
started
show me the
following,
money, even, right? If you're old enough like me, show me the money.
To be that, right? I was trying to show the investors the money, but something wasn't working. So I said, let me follow the money and really just understand exactly what's happening here. Because I had investor meetings that I needed to, I was the CEO. I had fiduciary responsibility to follow the money.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and I had hired an accounting firm, Kent Bowman, you mentioned. I hired his accounting firm, Tanner LLC, for that first year that I had stepped in. We planned on doing an audit. I was comfortable with the financials I ran. And so I dove in, and I had work during the day, and then I'd go home at night and I would put on my glasses and I would do my financial, forensics. And this was on historical financials before I joined. And long story short, I identified that there had been over 50 million, as I found it, fraud committed by the founder and
Yikes.
chairman,
Yikes.
which completely flipped my world upside down. Was quite tragic to find. I and I After breathing through a paper bag, um, essentially Googled the SEC. How do I report this? And because I just knew I need to immediately I need to not be connected with this, but I figured I'm sure there's going to be an amicable way to, make
Work it
sure that
out.
this company keeps running. And I need to have this addressed. I'm sure that the system will address this. It's a good thing I found it. I'm working through in my mind this narrative that I'm sure it's all going to be okay. But maybe I needed to be the one that to find this, and it's all going to be reconciled.
And is it
So
to this day? Is it still allegedly, or I don't want to spoil the ending, but I just want to know at this point where you are. Is this just you, and maybe it's not true, or is it
do you
definitely?
want me to tell you now where it is?
No, don't. You don't have to end the story, but I just wondered at this point in time, is it
At
just
that point in time,
yeah? You're just hoping it's going to
at
work
that,
out, and somehow you
yeah,
are
at
magically
that
wrong.
right. At
Okay.
that point, exactly. At that point, I'm like, I hope that I did the numbers wrong and that there's going
Mm.
to be a, gosh, Jill, you understandably you could see it this way,
Yeah.
but actually it worked out and it's really all things are okay.
Yeah.
But I said, so that's what I was hoping
Getting to the bottom of
that
it though.
we're going to get to the bottom of it. The company's going to be okay. All these weddings are going to be fine, but I'm going to report this to the SEC and they're smarter than me and I'm sure it's going to all be okay. So I go and I report it to the SEC, and I have my stacks of papers, and my hands are shaking. They're grateful to meet with me, and I walk in, and I'm at U.S. courthouse, and it's me, I alone, and I walk in, and there's about a dozen uh, individuals there, U.S. attorneys and individuals with the SEC and various others, and I won't go into too much detail, but we had a productive meeting, and it was left with they were grateful to. I don't want to speak for them, but
They
they
acted
took
it. Hmm.
information, yep, to act on, and they said, I needed to just keep doing what I was doing, and they would run with what they were going to run with in their bureaucratic system. And so, but they suggested go, make sure that things like that aren't happening in the business, right? I
Yeah.
said, absolutely. I'll be, making sure that I have full governance and that what I have identified is not going to happen under my watch.
Yeah.
So they said, we're going to run with what we run with, and you do what you do, right? We're not your attorneys. And said, noted. So the next day, and I needed to be quiet about the fact that I had
You
just
did that.
seen them.
Yeah, let me ask you about that before you keep going. So
Yeah.
I've never gone to an SEC building and talked to an SEC employee about a $50 million
Yeah.
fraud I've discovered as a professional financial
Yeah.
person. So let me know this. Like at the moment you kind of come to terms with the fact that you're pretty sure about your math and your accounting ability with the portion that's not looking right, the
Yeah.
decision making, why doesn't one go to the people responsible and say, hey, explain this, I need to know right this second? Or you have a choice to go there and many places, and you went to the SEC, which is the boss of all such things. Just
Hmm.
tell the audience about that decision, and why it's a good decision, or what you feel like about it.
In this instance, because of the position I was in as CEO of the company,
Mm-hmm.
I held the potential risk and liability for what was done in that company.
So as newbie, you had to hurry and get there and wipe your own slate clean and get to the bottom of it for the other people involved. Yeah.
Yeah, and make sure that I could show that the moment I was choosing to, and per legal counsel suggestion, because I wondered, hey, is this something that I simply address internally? And the strong legal suggestion was
Run.
make sure that you are very clearly state that you have seen this and you are not at all associated with this.
Run carrying all your
So
boxes to the king
yeah,
of such
and
things in the
carry
world.
those in.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
and I am very grateful that I did that.
Yeah.
And then the next day, after doing that, the next day I went in and met with the chairman and the number two. Well, my number two, they both had hired me, and had a strategic planning meeting with them. And so not stating that I was aware of fraud, but just simply saying, hey, because the new, sheriff's in town, but in a very approachable way, I said, hey, I'm CEO. I need to, as I'm sure you can very much value and appreciate, the chairman and my number two, I need to manage our financials, make sure that everything is prepared for our upcoming audit at year end, right? And that we're prepared to report to our investors. And so I have policies and procedures that I'm going to be instituting that are best practices. And so I'm happy to do that, and ran them through what I was going to do. So essentially saying, hey, I'm sure this is why you hired me, right? So that they could, hopefully I was believing that they could hold ownership to that, and feel a sense of empowerment that, hey, we're the C-suite team and you're the chairman, and this is for us and for our, betterment, right? And risk management. And that I'd be able to do that. So,
How'd that go over?
So that was at, call it 4 p.m. that day, have the meeting. I walk in my office the next day, and my number two was sitting in my office.
Thank you for joining us for the first half of this interview. Now go to markspencercook.com/podcast or your favorite podcast provider or YouTube to see the second half of this great interview.